Good evening. It's about 6, and I guess we'll get started. My name is Christy Bardenhagen. I'm the Vice President of the League of Women Voters, and I'd like to welcome you all here. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that strives to do 3 things. We encourage informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues. And we influence public policy through education and advocacy. We never ever support or oppose candidates or parties. Men and women who are at least 16 years of age and American citizens may join the League. The Leelanau League currently has over 170 members, of which 35% are men. More information on the League may be found at LWVLC.org, our website. Dues are $60 a person per year or $90 for a family membership. Membership applications can be found online at LWVLC.org and also on the table outside. Tonight we host a forum entitled First Things First, Early Childhood in Leelanau, Supporting Community Resilience. The League's Early Childhood Needs and Services Committee Chairperson, Sue Miller, will introduce our speaker and moderate the program. Our next monthly program will be November 1st at noon, when the Farm Labor Task Force will present a panel on local consequences of worker shortages in Leelanau County. We'll be hearing from businesses in our services sector that are experiencing labor shortage problems. Now I would like to turn this over to Sue.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to start by welcoming you and also thanking the Early Childhood Needs and Services Committee that so generously shared their salads tonight and fed this group. And as you probably discovered, we're trying something new, and we thought it was time for an evening meeting to open ourselves up for perhaps some people who couldn't make the meetings during the day. So for any of you who are coming here for the first time for one of our meetings, welcome. I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker, Maggie Spratt-Morton, to you. She has worked in early childhood development for a long time, and many of you may be familiar with her from the Leelanau Children's Center, where she served as director for 27 years. She holds an MA in Human Growth and Development and another in Counseling Education. She's been endorsed as a mentor by the Michigan Association for Infant Mental Health and has been awarded a number of other certificates, including her recent completion of the Self-Regulation Foundation's program. She's also a licensed therapist. Maggie currently serves as a mental health consultant for the Great Start Readiness Program of the Traverse Bay Intermediate School District, as well as consulting with 2 local Head Start grantees. In addition, Maggie provides reflective consultation and practice support for direct service providers. That includes teachers, home visitors, nurses, and therapists who work with young children, both in school settings but also at home. She's also teaching 2 courses in self-regulation, 2 locally and another one online. Maybe most importantly, Maggie is a daughter, a mother, and a grandmother, so she has lots of experience with children. When she isn't working, she's enjoying countless active outdoor activities here in Leelanau County, or she's traveling. We're fortunate to have her with us tonight. After her presentation, we will be opening the format to a question and answer session. So you're welcome to think about questions you might have for her during the presentation. Maggie, if you'd like to come up, we'll get started. And if any of you have any difficulty hearing the presentation tonight, if you could just give us a signal, we will make sure that the microphones are adjusted. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. So before I get started, I really want to thank, I'm honored to be here tonight, first. It's interesting, as I was preparing this, I had a much harder time than I usually do because I feel like you all know so much of this conversation. We've been in conversation here for so long, so it created a really interesting challenge for me as I thought about what remarks I would make. But I really want to thank the League of Women Voters nationally. I think that the League has really helped inform the democratic process. And I think at a time like this, that matters more than ever. So big thanks to the League nationally. Big thanks to Vina, who helped bring it to us right here in Leelanau County, and we promised to carry on in her footsteps. And thanks to Marion, is she here? No, she's not here, for holding the torch, and Christy. Thank you so much for being leaders for us now. And of course to Sue for chairing this committee, which is so near and dear to my heart. So I was asked to come sort of follow on the heels of the last conversation you had, which was about the ACEs study. And I guess the question that emerged from that ACEs study is, okay, well, this is difficult. What now? What do we do based on that? So I think that's where we'll go tonight. I'm going to give you a little, just a really quick summary of what the ACEs is. ACEs are, ACEs is, it's a study. Teeny bit of brain science. I will do an interesting little way to think about some science. And then we'll actually look at what do we do and what might we do. And I hope really all I do is stimulate more conversation for you. This ought to be sort of a stirring of the pot. I hope I create a little dissonance and a little opportunity for you to think more and figure out how we might engage as a community in response to some of what the ACE study has taught us. So I hope that's what you came here for. And thanks for coming inside on a day like this. That's kind of a tall order as far as I'm concerned, because we could be swimming again, you know. It could be our last day to swim. So let's talk about the ACE study in 2 seconds. ACE study stands for Adverse Childhood Effects. And there are just a few things that I want to make sure you know about it. If you want to know more, there's a fabulous website called ACEs Too High, or you can just Google ACE study. There's a ton of information. But I think a couple of things that are really, really important to note about it is that the ACE study was done by, the first one was done by Kaiser Permanente. And it was done on Americans who were well-employed, well-insured, and have what we consider to be stable lives, for lack of a better word. And the data that we find is still pretty alarming. So the study is about us, right? It's not about those people. And I think that's really important that we recognize that this idea of there are those people and there's us, the ACE study sort of helps us, I think, begin to blur that line and say, this stuff is about all of us, which for me is a really important message. So lots and lots of people, blah, 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 lots of stuff on the ACE study that you can think about. 2/3 of the people in this room here today, 2/3 of any group of respondents to the ACE work will tell us that they have at least one ACE, and an ACE is an adverse childhood effect, something crummy that happened to you when you were little, as defined by this study. And we have stuff for you after the meeting you can look at. So most of us in this room will report that we had at least one. If we had one, 87 of us will report that we had two. Okay, so again, most of us experience something crummy when we're little. The other thing that I think is important to notice is that those of us who have 4 ACEs or more, which is about 20% of the general population, experience long-term, it should be well-being, not bring, well-being consequences. So there actually are ramifications to our physical, social, and emotional health. And then those of us who have 6 or more ACEs are statistically likely to have about 20 years cut off of our lives. Right? So this is not just like woo-woo stuff. This is actually really hard data about the effects of what happens to us when we're little. So we could talk a lot about this study. There's lots of fabulous stuff to dive into, but that's not what I'm here to do, even though it's pretty hard for me not to do. In fact, talking to you for 30 minutes is going to drive me nuts because there's so much that we ought to talk about. So I want to give you a little tool that might help you think about the ACE study and many of the other things we talk about when we're talking about the early childhood years. So if you're done eating, if you would hold up one of your hands, you need a palm in the air. I don't know how to do this with a microphone. Who can do brain in the hand? Amanda, can you do it? Can you come up here and help us? So Amanda will be Vanna, and I'll walk us through it. So Amanda's a home visitor, fabulous young woman who can, she could say everything I have to say here tonight.
Don't know about that one.
I do, I'm confident. Okay, so you're gonna watch her hand. So this part, so I want you to touch the part I'm talking about. So this part, this is gonna be our brain. We're building a brain right now. So this part of your body, or the representation, is actually your nervous system, right? And it goes right down your back through your spinal column. The early part of us to develop, and it really is the central highway that sends information up and down from the brain to the body, and actually most of the information goes up, interestingly enough. It's sort of a two-lane road up and a one-lane road down, which is interesting. Nope, keep it open. Next part of the brain to develop is the brainstem. Okay, brainstem is right here. Again, it's the earliest part of the actual brain to develop, and that part of the brain is just responsible for keeping you alive. It has a 15-second window of thinking, so to speak. Right? It doesn't care about consequences. It doesn't care about downstream effects. It cares about keeping you alive now. So it's going to increase heart rate, decrease temperature, turn off organs in response to some messages that it gets from the rest of the brain. Okay, so our babies are born, most of our babies when they're born, this is intact. And that's how they have a heartbeat and stuff. Next part of the brain to develop, so stick your thumb right on the palm of your hand, that's your amygdala. So that's your emotion regulation center, and sometimes we call that the smoke detector. And you'll see it's right in relation, it touches the brainstem. Right, so this is kind of the, let's use the analogy of a smoke detector. It's constantly assessing the environment for threat. Are we safe? Are we not safe? And it's sending messages to the brainstem. Life is good, we're safe, let the organs do their function. Heartbeat can stay low. You don't need to raise our pulse. If it detects threat, it's like your smoke alarm. Kick up heartbeat. We need lots of energy to the muscles. We don't care about digestion right now. We don't care about immunity because we have a 15-second window we're thinking about. So this part of the brain is developing partly when we're in our mother's bellies, or whoever is carrying us bellies, and partly on the outside. We humans are the most adaptive mammals on the planet as far as we know. And so this thing is actually developing in relationship to the world in which the child lives. So if the child is exposed to lots of scary stuff, that amygdala is going to be much more vigilant and much quicker to say, oh, that's terrible, brainstem, go into action. Oh, that was good. If this child is growing up in a pretty mellow jello environment, the amygdala is going to be a little more relaxed. Might look around and say, oh, there's a shadow. Oh, I love shadows because that means sunset's coming. Right? For the other kids' amygdala, the shadow is going to mean somebody's coming. There's danger coming. Right? So my amygdala and her amygdala look different no matter what our experiences are that look the same. The next part of the brain to develop, and it's really nice if you can kind of run your other hand right over the top. Right? It feels sort of soothing, doesn't it? That's your cortex. And you can see how those fingers of yours are touching your amygdala. So this is the last part of our brain to develop. It's not finished until people are about 26, we think. So be really nice to your adult kids that you think should have their act together. They're not done yet. So the cool thing about the cortex is when the smoke alarm goes off, the cortex says, oh, thank you for the alarm. Let me check and see what's going on. Oh, it's toast. It's just toast. instead of a fire. I mean, that's what happens in my house. The smoke detector goes off when I make toast. So my cortex has learned that, right? So now I have this kind of nice braking process. I still get a little cortisol spike. I still get a little bit of a message to my brainstem that activates me, but my cortex calms things down. Well, what happens when we have a bunch of ACEs or a bunch of crummy stuff? Remember that amygdala, that's out of your amygdala, the amygdala develops based on experience. So when I have a bunch of ACEs, my amygdala is more active. So what's going to happen when I frighten Amanda is she's going to flip her lid. Right? And that means that the limbic system, the amygdala, is in charge. And the cortex really doesn't have a big voice. The cortex can't say, let me check on that for you, because it's offline. Okay, so it's just a little thing to think about, that when we flip our lid, we're not thoughtful. We can't be thoughtful. We're reactive. And our job to think about is how do we help the cortex come back online, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Thank you, Anna. So does that make a little bit of sense? Yeah. I mean, it's just this really simple, it's ridiculously simple, but I think it's nice to have it right in your pocket. You can have a little reminder, and you can be kind to each other and say, I flipped my lid, I'm terribly sorry. Or maybe your beloved can say, your lid is flipped, let me help. Because often when our lid's flipped, we can't do it on our own, we need somebody to help us. Okay, so that's sort of a summary of the ACEs study from a serious layperson's perspective. So again, I think what y'all asked me to come address tonight is not really the ACEs and not really brain science, even though I love that stuff. But what do we do? Now that we know about this ACEs business, what do we do? And I think often there's sort of there are two responses that we hear. One is, we need to get rid of child abuse and neglect. We need to reduce ACEs. And actually, if you drive through Traverse City right now, you'll see big posters that say, what do they say? Zero tolerance for child abuse, I think. Well, that's one strategy that a lot of people feel really, really strongly about. I have to say, I don't actually believe we can get to zero, because I think crummy things happen. And ACEs sometimes are a death in the family. Sometimes they're incarceration. Sometimes they're things that are kind of unpreventable, and they're just are going to happen. So I feel like the compassionate thing to do is not just to think about how do we reduce the number of ACEs that exist, but how do we create a community that supports people who experience ACEs. And that's what we'll be thinking about a little bit tonight. So how do we do that? It's Gerardo, you know, big Gerardo, your postman? This is baby Gerardo, he was called, who's off in college now, I just would point out. He's a great example of resilience. Actually, he's a fabulous example of resilience. Anybody go to the post office and see big Gerardo in his outfit? Yeah. Yes, I did. So his dad is the postman in Lake Leelanau, and he was supporting Breast Cancer Awareness Day or week or something. Day. And he showed up in a pink tutu along with the assistant postmaster, and all day they were rocking it with their pink tutus. And pretty fabulous humans. Anyway, so we have a fairly substantial body of data that suggests that there are a number of us in this room who've experienced 4 or more ACEs, and yet who are right here, right now. We didn't crumble under the weight of those ACEs, which we sort of should have done, right? We should be flipping our lids every 12 seconds based on those ACEs. Well, we didn't. And what the research seems to be pointing to is we didn't because we had enough buffering agents in place. So think about those of us who love to live in the north and who like to play outside in the wintertime. We've learned how to do that, right? We've learned how to add layers of clothing. And if you like to move outside, you've even learned about layering, so you can put clothes on and take clothes off. So we've learned about buffering, and it's the same in this social science. We really have learned that we can actually do things that buffer people from the impact of harm. And actually, Leelanau County has been a leader in this. Amanda, who was my Vanna, and Christy Thomas, and Tricia Denton, and Sarah Jane, I think are the folks, oh, and Kathy Bartell, thank you, Kathy, are people who actually have been part of a movement called Parenting Communities, which was nationally recognized as one of 19 programs in the United States that does a really fabulous job with this protective factors concept, which is exactly how resilience develops. So resilience develops when we have protective factors. And again, the research is fairly clear that there are really kind of 5 key protective factors. And I think of them actually as 4 key protective factors that equal the 5th one. And I want us to think carefully about these. So I'll just say them out loud and you can read them too. Social connections is one, and I could give you a whole bunch of science about why that matters. See me later if you want some more science. Some knowledge of child development and parenting is another. Concrete supports in times of need, another. Social emotional competence is another. It is a mother too. And I think those 4 actually add up to resilience in my little mind. When we talk about this in communities, generally speaking, people get really excited about, cool, let's get after the information and the concrete supports in times of need, because those are pretty easy to wrap our arms around. Let's open more baby pantries. Let's kick up the blessings in a backpack, is that what it's called? Blessings in a backpack. Let's have more school lunches, right? Those concrete things. What we don't typically kick up a whole lot is our own engagement with one another. And we don't typically, I would argue, spend enough time thinking about even our baby pantries, let's say. For example, how we are in our baby pantries. We don't think about the impact of the social connections. And I would argue, well, we shouldn't ever have anybody be hungry on the streets, nor should we have anybody be isolated and lonely on the streets. And in fact, there's a fabulous psychiatrist down at University of Michigan, Murray Music, who argues that relationships are medicine. And we really need to think carefully about how we're going to be in relationship with one another. And there's a whole science, when we talk about this, there's a whole science of what's called co-regulation. And when people have flipped their lids, actually the most effective, I'm going to say, and I think the research would bear me out, and if any of you have a different perspective, I'd love to hear it. But the most effective way to help this happen is what we call co-regulation, is being with. Doesn't mean fixing it for somebody, doesn't mean doing it for somebody, but it means coming alongside. It means being curious about them. It means being able, like with your whole heart and soul, to bear witness to what's happening for them and with them. That's a little different than delivering a school lunch program. Does that make a little bit of sense? So I think one of the things that this community, oh gosh, I just get teary talking about this. Because I think one of the things this community has done so beautifully has been to think about that. And I don't know that we've thought enough about that. I don't know that we ever can. But again, this question of what can I do beside you that will support you, but that won't do it for you? Am I making any sense? Yeah. So ultimately, that's how we build resilience. Right? We build resilience by saying, I believe in you, and I know you can't do it alone, so I'm going to be here next to you in whatever way I can. And each of us would have a different way that we could do that. There's a really beautiful little project that was done in somewhere on the other side of our big lake. I don't remember if it's Wisconsin or Minnesota. Those of you who've been around in this field might remember the Search Institute. And it was called the Give 'em 40, what was it called, sir? The Give 'em 40 campaign, right? And we did kids in, I don't remember, do you remember the grades, like 7th and 10th grade or something, took a survey, and they were asked about their internal like protective factors and external protective factors. So one little community did this out in Minnesota, and they found that their kids really were low on a lot of these protective factors that they felt mattered. The community didn't have any money. It was up in, I don't know, somewhere north. So they sat around and thought about what they could do. And they decided that the one thing that they could do is they could make eye contact with kids when they walked down the street. It was the one action that the community agreed to do. So they began to do that. And then, of course, the eye contact led to, hey, I think your mom was in the hospital, how's she doing? Or you won the volleyball tournament, I don't know. Your dog was running down the street yesterday. It doesn't matter, right? What matters is that there was a little bit of that happened. And they surveyed the kids in the community 2 years later, and oh gosh, all kinds of things had changed. They didn't spend any money. They didn't do anything fancy. And then when they asked the adults what the community felt like, they said, I feel so much more connected. And they were talking about an intergenerational connection, not connection of, the white hairs with the white hairs and the kids to the kids, but this whole sort of sense of a community connectedness. And I love that story because I think it reminds us that while we certainly have big, expensive issues to tackle, and I would be the first to argue that we ought to be spending a lot of money in the early childhood years. I'm unapologetic about it. And I think we ought to raise the bar to the highest possible standard. We shouldn't have these crappy parking lots for kids. We should have fabulous places for kids and parents. And at the same time, every one of us can walk down the street and make eye contact with somebody. Or every one of us who's working on the blessings in the backpack or whatever the heck it is you do can really think about, gosh, if I have an eligibility criterion, what's it like for the person who doesn't qualify? Or if I have a rule that says you only get $400, what's it like for the person who has a crummy thing happen at $410? Or I don't know, whatever the story is. So I guess what I really wanted to add to the conversation is this notion of, yep, we need to find money, yep, we need to do this, that, and the other thing, yep, we need to do concrete supports in times of need, yep, people could use some information, although I promise you information doesn't actually create transformation. Relationships create transformation. Information helps. But really the thing I would love to make a little sandpaper effect about tonight is that business of how. How will we? How will each of us individually and how will we collectively work to ensure that our community, and whatever that means to you, that our community, our neighborhood, has the ingredients of resilience. So that whether a person has one ace or 7 aces, there's somebody who's not going to scoop them up and fix it for them. You can't fix an ace. But who's going to just come alongside in the way they can and seek to understand instead of to judge. So once upon a time, I sound old. I'm a grandmother now, I can say that. So once upon a time in Leelanau County, we actually thought about service delivery kind of from this relational perspective. We thought about what the science people call relational competence, which just sounds terrible, doesn't it? But we really thought about how do we flip the way we deliver services in this world. And what if we had a world where everybody, there were no eligibility criteria, but everybody had access to all the stuff on the top. And we just made up stuff that we put up there. But the idea was ways to connect with other people, lots and lots of ways to connect.